Our board host today, sitting at the head table, is Vivian Solomon. She's a member of the Board of Governors and a partner with the law firm Lane Powell Spears Lebersky. She will ask the first question of our panel. The second question today will be asked by Diana Smiley, co-chair of the Education Standing Committee. We open the meeting up to questions from City Club members in the audience after our speakers' prepared remarks. Written questions will be asked as time permits. Please hold them up if you wish to submit them to staff. We're certainly honored today by the prospect of hearing from the presidents of Oregon's three major universities, Oregon State, Portland State, and the University of Oregon, as the size of this audience today attests. Their joint appearance is only one sign of their increasing collaboration to the benefit of higher education in Oregon. Besides the commonalities of their current positions, each individual pursued their graduate and undergraduate degrees at schools of the first rank. Each has the foundation of distinguished academic performance, and each rose through academic administration. Dr. John Byrne, president of Oregon State University, was named to the post in 1984. He's been principally affiliated with Oregon State since 1960. He left Oregon for Washington, D.C. in 1981 to serve as head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and then returned to assume the presidency. He's a marine geologist by training. Dr. Judith Ramaley, president of Portland State University, came to Oregon in 1990. Her most recent prior experience was as executive vice chancellor of the University of Kansas at Lawrence. She is a neuroendocrinologist by training and concurrently holds the rank of professor of biology at Portland State University. Dr. Myles Brand, president of the University of Oregon, assumed his post in 1989. Dr. Brand came to the University of Oregon from Ohio State University, where he was provost and vice president for academic affairs. He is a philosopher and continues to write in his discipline. Today, the oceanographer, the biologist, and the philosopher come together, in that order, to give us a window into Oregon's future based on its educational commitments. Will you join me in a warm welcome to these distinguished leaders in higher education?
Thank you very much. We all welcome the opportunity to visit with you this afternoon and to talk about things that we think are critically important. I'm not sure you really realize how significant this event is when the presidents of these three institutions come together on the same platform. In fact, it's reflective of the movement of the three universities together, so much so that we've even considered a single mascot for the three of us, if you can envision a duck-billed platypus wearing a Viking helmet. In any case, what we want to talk about today is the importance of education, the importance of educational reform, and the importance of higher education in that educational reform. I think we all reflect on the changes that are taking place in the world today and the need to prepare students for that world of tomorrow. And I will address that very briefly. Judith will focus on the role of higher education in assisting the primary and secondary levels of education in this state to go through the reform which you're all, I think, aware of. And Myles will address the immediate context in which we're operating, some of the barriers and obstacles to that reform, both at the K-12 level, but I think probably also at the higher education level. All we need to do is to think about the headlines, the magazine articles, the TV documentaries that we've seen recently to recognize the major changes that are taking place in the world today. They're not the same kinds of changes that we have been used to over the years, over the decades. We've seen major political upheavals. We've seen great shifts from local economy to global economies, significant changes in our social demographics on a worldwide basis, a recognition that man does have the capability of destroying our ability to live on this planet, and also a recognition that we can now reach into information sources anywhere in the world with the speed of light. And that's the kind of world that our students will be entering when they complete their education at our institutions, because their education will not be completed at our institutions, it will continue throughout the rest of their lives. And those are some of the things that we'd like to focus on. The one thing I think we can be sure is that in spite of the fact that change has been very rapid, the rate of change will continue to increase. We will go through a period of acceleration. We won't go through it. We'll be faced with it for the rest of our lives. Now, we're not the first to recognize this recognition of the paradigm shifts that are taking place throughout the world were recognized in 1982 by Fritjof Capra in a book called The Turning Point. They were recognized by Peter Drucker in speaking of management and so on in 1989 in a book called The New Realities. And they were recognized by Walter Wriston last year in a book called The Twilight of Sovereignty. Each of these recognize that we really are moving into a world which is significantly different from that which most of us are familiar with. Colleges and universities have constantly changed to meet the kinds of changes that take place in society. You need only look at the college catalogs 20 years, 40 years, 60 years ago to recognize very significant changes. When I came to Oregon in 1960, marine science was only a small part of our curriculum. It's now a major part. The advent of new technologies and so on have led to departments of computer science, computer engineering, and so on. We are keeping pace, but the kinds of changes that we're faced on a global basis now are much more significant than those which we have tried to keep pace with over the last several years or over the last several decades. As we do this, we recognize more and more that we need to use all of the resources available to us. And those are not just the traditional educational resources, those are resources in the private sector, in government, and so on. I used to take delight in sharing with faculty that what we had to do was to exchange ideas with the community outside the university, and to put it in scientific jargon, to enhance the permeability of the walls of the academy. And we're trying to do that. Partnering becomes more and more of a factor. We find that we are partnering with community colleges, with each other. We're partnering with the private sector. We are adopting a number of the measures that we can learn from the private sector. Goals and objective setting. Before the last decade or so, most institutions of higher education didn't do that. Strategic planning. The introduction of total quality management techniques stimulated by activities such as those created by Edwards Deming and others and applied to some of the major industries in this country. And more recently, as we have approached significant budget reductions, the whole matter of re-engineering processes. As we do this, we must remember that one of the keys to our future is an educated workforce. And that's what the K-12 reformation really stemmed from, a recognition that the workforce in Oregon, the workforce in the United States, was not keeping up, was not being competitive with those from the rest of the world. We would contend that the leaders for that workforce come through higher education, that the teachers come through higher education, that the role of higher education is significant in the entire matter of educational reform. Judith will talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening at the K-12 level that I think most of you are familiar with. Let me address some of the things that are happening. I can easily say in an evolutionary way. I wish I could say in a revolutionary way in higher education. We recognize that students learn best when they do, not when they sit and listen or watch. And so you're seeing more and more involvement of students in practical problems as we approach the need to educate them. We recognize that students work best and learn best when they work together. And I think most high school teachers will tell you that the kids who do their homework best do it together rather than alone. And so instead of thinking about team teaching, we're now thinking about team learning, where students are learning together in organized groups or even unorganized groups. We recognize that you must change the living environment into a better learning environment, that people are learning constantly, And that if we want them to learn the right things, we need to control that time outside the classroom in a little bit better way. We recognize that in this world, everything is connected to everything else. And systems thinking then becomes an integral part of education at virtually all levels. And that the organizations we represent must be learning organizations where we learn from everyone. Judith and I just returned last night from a conference in Chicago, or a suburb just outside Chicago, sponsored by Motorola, in looking at the introduction of total quality techniques to academe, not just to the curriculum, but to the operation of the universities and so on. And it's a recognition that competitiveness throughout the world requires that we do the very best we can in a very competitive society, that we work together, that we partner with each other and with other organizations. Lifelong learning is something we recognize. We heard what the half-lives of different kinds of information and knowledge were, and they're such that we recognize that to keep abreast, you must continue to learn in a continuing way. There are lots of examples that we could each give you from our own institutions as to how we're applying the needs to move in these various directions. And quality, of course, is uppermost. I like to tell people about the shoe shop in Corvallis when I moved there in 1960. It was one of those narrow stores, and you all know they're bright in the front and very dark in the back. And when you went in and you finally got back to where the shoe repair person was, there was a sign on the wall that said, "Quality, price, service. Pick any two." We must pick quality. We must pick quality. And then it becomes a matter of how do we adjust the price and the service. In any case, as we do this, we need to recognize that we are moving into a rapidly evolving world where information is available to everyone, where the role of faculty change from being sources of information to being guides to the location of the right information. We learned the other day that within the next decade, cellular phones will reach anyone, anywhere in the world. That by the addition of 66 new satellites, we'll be able to create cellular phone systems such as we have here in Portland. Some of us don't really welcome that, but nevertheless, it will happen. As we do all of these things, as we recognize the need to change, we need to pass that on to the people who are primarily responsible for education at the primary and secondary level. That higher education will play that key role, and in fact is already playing it. And Judith will now address some of the ways that we are being involved with primary and secondary educational reform.
Do you feel like you're watching a relay race to see how seamless the comments can be? We've set ourselves some very challenging tasks in this state through what we've proposed in 3565, as well as what we've said in the Oregon benchmarks about literacy, about early childhood education, about what we hope from our elementary school, middle school, and high school curricula and experiences, what we hope for in preparing young people to go on to college, adults to return to college, the completion of college, the completion of post-secondary education. And the only way that we are going to be able to achieve those goals is to work together. And the only way we can do that is to invent some new ways of doing so. And there are three conditions that must exist for this to work, and we have some experience with all of these, and I'll describe the conditions and then give you a few examples from several of our institutions in the Oregon State system. The first is we're beginning to span traditional boundaries that divide one department or program from another on our campuses, that divide one school from another on our campuses, that divide campuses from each other, that divide higher ed from the community colleges, from the public schools, and divide all of the above from the communities that support and provide resources for the educational mission that we serve. After all, most problems don't come anymore, if they ever did, in the form of oceanography, biology, or philosophy, and so the three of us would not, even working together, probably be able to solve all the problems. They come in complicated forms. They will require different people with different experiences and talents to bring to the table to come up with good answers. Second, we're starting to bring together activities that in higher ed we used to categorize separately. We used to call certain kinds of activities teaching, research, or service. Increasingly, in some of the examples I'm going to give you today, those three things are coming together and the boundaries are blurring. And it's very hard to tell in a team of faculty and staff and students and community people and public school teachers what is going on as that group works together. Is that research? Is it teaching? Or it's service? And my favorite answer to that is yes, it is. We've had some early success in providing opportunities for people to work together who didn't used to, as partners, as equals, sharing in designing the questions, figuring out how to approach them, understanding the circumstances that will affect how well the solutions can be implemented, and then helping to implement those solutions that involve public school teachers, higher ed folks, community college folks, community people, including the parents and significant family members of students in our schools. When these conditions are in place, the questions we ask are important and the answers we get can be useful to the community, while at the same time serving the goals of our reform in higher education of our own curriculum, which we're increasingly trying to bring together with the needs of the community so that educational needs and community needs are served at the same time. Now, each of the institutions in Oregon, public or private, has a particular way to express this because of the mission of that institution, the expertise of its faculty, staff, and students, and the particular concerns and needs of the community surrounding that institution. And so as I go through some of these examples, you'll see some distinctive character emerging depending on whether it's Portland State that's in the center of it, or the University of Oregon, or Oregon State, or Western Oregon State College, or a partnership with a community college. All of this, in fact, is occurring nationally. There is an initiative called the K-16 initiative Portland State is involved in with our Portland Educational Network that is built on the notion that public schools and post-secondary institutions both need to reform. And we cannot reform separately from each other, but we must work together and help each other do so. That existing partnerships that have involved local schools and community colleges and higher ed in this state have been effective, but they haven't gone from the scale that started them to a full-scale reform. That we can improve elementary and secondary education without changing post-secondary education at the same time and as deeply. And we need to admit that our efforts in the past just didn't pan out the way we had hoped. So here in Oregon, as well as across the country, there are communities doing what we're doing. All of this implies that education reform is a cooperative effort. Now, let me give a couple of examples in teacher education, both pre-service for those preparing to go into the profession and for people who are actively teachers and school administrators today. One example, I'll naturally start with my own institution, Portland State, is what we call our flexible system cohort. Now, I have all kinds of physical images in my mind for that, but what it really means is we are shifting and have shifted teacher education from a focus on the individual preparing to go into an isolated classroom to a group of people who come into the program together as a cohort, generally about 30 people at a time, who select, with the help of the community, a central problem that they will study while they are in their preparation. To that cohort will be added community leaders, practitioners, might be in social services, healthcare. If it's a school-to-work transition focus, it might be people in the business community, as well as people in the local schools. And what comes as a result of this is not only the preparation of an individual who can work in a new context with a new underlying philosophy, but products that can be put into use right away. Examples of the kinds of things we've worked on range from classrooms as families, providing a more caring, supportive learning environment, literacy and early reading instruction, inclusive education, which means mainstreaming diverse types of students in one classroom, workforce development, factors in the success of minority students and at-risk students, and so on. It's a different way of working together. A second example is the Model Teacher Education Plan at Western Oregon State College. Western and the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission are collaborating in developing a model teacher education plan to support some of the specific standards that are built into 3565. For instance, how do you work in an ungraded primary? How do you train to educate students based on outcomes and what they can do with their education and portfolio assessment and the like, rather than standardized tests? The University of Oregon has a number of collaborative projects, and they focus on a wide range of topics. There's one with the South Lane County schools to develop new academic performance outcome standards for all elementary students in that district. There are about 1,200 of those students in grades, first grade to fifth grade. And once these standards are developed collaboratively with the schools will then continue to develop the programs on their own with some occasional additional technical assistance and support from the University of Oregon. Another example is a program called Building Capacity for Change, which has provided fellowships for 22 teachers, administrators, classified staff, and family members of children with disabilities. The aims to increase the capacity of the school community to design its own programming to support the needs of children with unusual and special needs for their education. Then at OSU, there's school counselor training, because as the schools are changing dramatically, so is the role of the counselor. And there are a variety of ways to work with people who are currently counselors and those preparing for that profession to prepare them for a much more interactive school environment, for a school environment much more open to the community around the school, schools where various kinds of integration of social services and healthcare services will become the norm, where the school will become a focal point for community development. There are opportunities here that are beyond our current imagination even, but will not be beyond the imagination of all of us working together. And then there are other examples. There are study groups for 3565 at Portland State, developing in-service programs with school teachers and members of the Department of Education so that people can learn what this new policy means and how it works in practice, and can study examples of successful implementation of 3565. We could go on, because there are many more examples. When we collected examples from the 4 institutions alone, they were 6 pages long in fairly small type. And I've only picked the ones that I thought gave you some range of the kinds of work we're doing. There's also action research, and each institution has a variation of this. For instance, Portland State is working with a number of school districts in East Multnomah County on the question of how to work with endangered children and youth. It involves in-service training, pre-service training, and research occurring concurrently in a setting in the public schools, creating what across the country is now being called a professional development school or professional development center. And we have other examples across the state of models in which people preparing to teach, people already teaching, and people who have significant questions they want to work on in their teaching careers interact with each other to find good answers. And there are some common threads in all of this. The programs are all collaborative, and they're driven by the education reform agenda and by the experience of kids and teachers and communities all over the state. All of us are learning at the same time that we're teaching and supporting each other, and we're learning from the best because we're looking for best practice. We're moving from theory to practice very quickly. Those of you in the business community will recognize that as shortening the cycle time for innovation. The distance between coming up with an idea and trying it out is getting shorter and shorter. Due to the collaborative nature of each of these programs, we're each serving as a resource for the others, so that we're all learning in the process. And taken as a whole, these efforts represent a very different approach to partnerships that bind together K-12, community college, higher education with their communities. And the effect is remarkable because of how quickly and how wonderfully teams of people are coming together and learning from each other. Today's focus was on what we're doing to help K-12 when we were asked to appear before you, but the truth is, Higher ed is changing at least as much as K through 12 is, and John Byrne spoke to some of that. It is deep in the very core of our being that we must rethink how to produce an environment that supports student understanding and ability to apply what they're learning to a variety of things that matter to those students, whether kindergarten kids or postgraduate students in various professional and graduate programs. Nationally, there's a lot of interest in rethinking education, and as I go around the country, I find that Oregon is becoming the place people turn to understand the confluence of reinventing government, educational reform, visions for a people and the place that they live. Each of you can help. You can get involved in the schools as they work toward educational reform, because this is not a matter for educators anymore. The phrase that I hear over and over again is, it takes an entire village to raise a child, a wonderful African proverb, and it fits this model. You can hold your educational institutions accountable for good results, and we all stand ready to respond to that challenge. You can make lifelong learning a personal priority for yourself, so that when you reach out to embrace a child, you are providing that child with a sense of what it really means to continue to believe enough in yourself to continue your own education. And you can support state and federal policies that make education a priority. And as a segue to Myles, you can help us remove the barriers and the difficulties that make this wonderful activity difficult to perform. And you can believe in every child and reach out and support them. Thank you.
It's not just the presidents that are cooperating and working together of the universities. It's the faculty in areas such as education reform, in other areas as well. To name one other example briefly, we are developing a joint professional business program for the entire state, focused primarily here in the Portland area, but affecting the entire state through MBA programs. But I don't want to talk about that today. I want to continue the conversation on educational reform. One key point to note is there are already in existence significant local and statewide partnerships between the universities and the schools. We are making progress. Yes, there's a long way to go, but we're working together to make progress. My assignment is to tell you not about the barriers, but about the challenges we need to meet in order to reach our potential as national leaders in the education reform movement. I'll give you 6 challenges, the first 5 of which we're making progress on, and I think with hard work and commitment we can resolve. The 6th one is special. First, we need to focus in on professional development of teachers. As we go through a reform movement, we are expecting more and different things of our K through 12 teachers. Higher education must work with the schools to accomplish that. Do we presently have sufficient numbers of people and talent, locally and in the state, to conduct this professional development? Second challenge, are the schools ready for rapid change? The state and the people want reform. They've spoken. But can the schools change fast enough to meet the expectations, even with the best of will? And are the parents ready? The reforms will result in different kinds of schools. Will the parents, the PTAs, and other interested parties have an opportunity to fully discuss and debate the kinds of issues that's involved with change? Third challenge. The reform movement, particularly at the secondary school level, involves workforce placements, at least on a temporary apprenticeship basis. Are there a sufficient variety and quantity of such opportunities is business ready for us, particularly when we get out of the greater metropolitan Portland area? Higher education and the schools are really making excellent progress in partnerships and working together. Higher education, for example, has been proactive on performance-based admission, though the job is not yet done. For all intents and purposes, the high school diploma that we all got and proud of, and it hangs on my wall, is a thing of the past. The transition between high school and college will be a period of time and not a point in time. Students will spend some of their time in high school, some of their time in college, and when they are ready to fully engage in college will be based upon their performances and not meeting a number of arbitrary sets or stages. Getting ready for those new admission requirements and standards is hard work. A number of good thinkers have evolved processes to do that. And just yesterday, at the Academic Council at Higher Education, there was a presentation moving strongly in that direction. It's a challenge. It's a meetable challenge, but it's a very different way of thinking about things. Fifth challenge, and an issue under discussion, not yet fully resolved, and a little harder than some of the others, is developing a balance between preparation for the workforce and pre-college preparation. Clearly, we need to do both. Both are very important. And we are moving K-12 and higher education systems and the community colleges, we are moving to a better understanding of the need to do both well at the secondary level. We're not quite there, but I don't see insurmountable boundaries. I don't see insurmountable barriers. I think the goodwill and the efforts will be successful there. Now for the sixth one. The issue that faces us in the state is not higher education versus K-12, but how to develop a commitment throughout the state to invest in its future. Investment in education is capital development. It's development for the future. It's not today or tomorrow. It's many years down the line. We cannot eat our seed corn. I think the best way to raise this challenge is to tell you a true story. Not long ago, I was sitting in a Chinese restaurant in Eugene, near the campus. This particular Chinese restaurant, as some of the others, has thin walls, rice paper walls separating. And I was sitting there eating my chow mein. And next to me, two young men came in. Actually, they weren't that young. They were late 20s, early 30s, but they were students. And one said to the other, "What do you think of higher education after Measure 5?" So, of course, I eavesdropped. They were our students. I could do that. The answer that came back rolled my socks down. One of the students said to the other, "I've got mine and I don't care. I'm graduating at the end of this year and I don't care what happens to higher education." The other student said, "Aren't you a native Oregonian? You've been here all your life." The other student says, "Yes, that's true. But I know I can be successful. I got mine and I don't care." The main challenge that faces us all is a question of values. What I've seen in this state since I've been here for 5 years is a shift, an unfortunate shift away from community values of valuing of the entire population where all people count, a shift away from community values to a shift towards individualistic values. I got mine and I don't care. Until we can reverse that trend that's been increasing, in my view, in the last few years, until we can reverse that trend, we will not be able to make genuine progress on educational reform because we will not have committed ourselves as a people to the future. And so I think it's important not merely to look at the individual problems and challenges we face. We'll get by those. We've got smart people of good faith. We'll work our way through those. But can we as a state and our local communities get our values in order? That's the question. Thank you.
We'll have questions from Vivian Solomon and then Diana Smiley, and time permitting from other City Club members.
This question follows up on the last speaker's comments, but is addressed to the entire panel. I'd like to know your views on specifically how higher education in Oregon will handle the students coming through the HB 3565 program, whether that will require retraining of university professors to handle differently trained students, and the role that higher education will play regarding technical advanced education programs.
Let me try first. And it's not that faculty and universities need to be retrained. It's that they need to be focused in on a certain series of problems. Having once focused in on those problems, we believe that they have the native talent as well as the experience to contribute towards that. As I look at my faculty, and I dare say the other faculties of education throughout the state, there is no question that educational reform will take place in this state, and they are working together to make it happen, whether it's in science and math education, languages, or in the core areas of math and English.
I'll just add to that, in addition to how we teach in the core disciplines, which are as much out in the open and being rethought as they are in the public school level, we're also rethinking general education, which is the core that every undergraduate student will experience, whether starting at our institutions as freshmen or moving into our institutions as transfer students. And at Portland State in specific, our faculty are examining a general education program that looks like the higher ed equivalent of the Certificate of Advanced Mastery. It has to do with how people learn to become educated individuals, able to use ideas and information that they acquire, that others in a team of people acquire, how they can apply that to community issues, how they can prepare themselves for a lifetime of learning. It's built on research on how students can be successful in higher ed, and it's being designed with the community around us. So each of our institutions is preparing for what we believe will be a significant change in the expectations of those who come to our colleges and universities in the future. And I believe you will see a very similar set of changes occurring at all levels in the system.
I guess the only thing I would add is one specific comment on the retraining, quote, of people in higher education, and it goes on all the time. And I think that we recognize that the most important thing that students coming out of any level of education learn is how to learn. And that continuation of being able to learn, I can apply to our faculty at Oregon State. We introduced a year or so ago a required writing course for every major at the senior level. So that if you were an engineering student, you would take a writing course from an engineer. Or if you were in pharmacy, you would take it from a pharmacist. And let me tell you, that was a real challenge to find engineers that knew how to teach writing. And I'm not picking on the engineers, but they can handle it. So, but we did that. We put together training programs, and the interesting thing was that as they began to use the new techniques, they not only used them in the courses in writing, but they introduced those techniques into many of the other courses they taught. So it's clear that the faculty can adjust, that the attitude, the approach is the important thing, the ability to learn exists.
I want to thank all of you for being here and for your insightful comments. A quick disclaimer, some of my best friends are tenured professors, before I ask the question. The question regards faculty tenure and the effect that faculty tenure may have on the ability of an institution to make changes. And specifically, my question for you is around those changes that are required by educational reform such as we have in Oregon. If each of you could make a quick comment, please.
Go this way
You want me to handle a tenure question?
No, we all three of us.
We could do it.
We'll all three do it.
Yeah, no, I'll give you my own bias, and watch the faculty members in the audience as I make these comments. I think the tenure system needs to be reviewed and revised. I don't think it needs to be disposed of, but I think it's ready for change just like everything else is ready for change. And as we see the new demands that we put on faculty, the ways that we ask them to do things different, we need to recognize that that will be effective as we change our reward system and recognize them for the kinds of things that they continue to do at an expert level. But we're already seeing changes. Traditionally, tenure is granted, at least it has evolved to a point where it's granted at the end of the 6th year. But now we're going through very intensive reviews at the end of 3 years. And faculty, this gives faculty who may not want to continue the option of leaving at 3 years. It also gives us the option of addressing those faculty and saying, if you really want tenure, if that's important, we need to look at that. We need to improve how you approach the tenure decision period, which could be changed. In Europe, tenure is granted at the full professor level generally, not at the associate professor level. So I think there are ways that we can adjust to this just like we can for everything else.
What I'd like to add to that is the issue is not tenure per se. The issue is, since faculty are people who have learned how to learn, how do our institutions support that continuing learning? How do we give people time to read the material, to talk with people, to work together, to design new forms of curriculum, to develop new kinds of scholarship? How do we give them the resources they need to support it, the technology that now is possible that can help illustrate ideas much more effectively than the past? So the productivity of our faculty and their readiness to look differently at their disciplines is much affected by the circumstances we can create on campus to support it. My feeling is the majority of our faculty across all of the Oregon State system institutions are ready to embrace these changes. They're exciting, they have effects on the heart and spirit that are hard to describe. But in watching our own faculty at Portland State, I can see what a remarkable opportunity it is to think differently, and they're doing so.
Just let me add a word about what tenure is. Tenure is not job security and unionization. Tenure is academic freedom protection. When you put faculty members, particularly in research positions, and ask them to break boundaries and set out in new directions, often quite unpopular, you have to provide them some protections from the political process, to be frank about it, as well as other interfering processes. That's the reason for tenure, and it's been enormously successful in this country. Just look at the fact of how many Nobel Prize winners we had, because people were willing to break boundaries. They would not have been willing to do that without the appropriate kinds of protections. That's what tenure is really all about.
If I might comment before our next questioner, we would normally adjourn at 1:30, but wanting to take full advantage of our guests, we will extend for 10 or 15 more minutes. If we have to lose our radio audience, we understand that, or others of you who must leave. But I would like to continue the questioning for 10 or 15 minutes more.
I'm Milt Markowitz. I'm a City Club member, and we have had a series called Oregon at Risk, and Dave Frohnmeyer and Bill Wyatt both talked about Oregon benchmarks and our goals as a state and the values that we hold dear. And they talked specifically about things like reducing entitlement and violence, those types of things. They both said unequivocally that a first-class education system is mandatory if we are to achieve those goals and to meet those values. And my question to any or all of the three of you is, what do you see higher education's role being in defining that education component for meeting those values and those goals? And what do you see higher education's role being in catalyzing the dialogue that's going to have to take place with community before we can agree on some civic values.
Two quick points. First of all, higher education can contribute in the primary and secondary school arena. Let me give you an example. At the University of Oregon, through our special education division, we are identifying in the first and second grade students who will prevent problems in the future. One of the problems that this society and Oregon and Portland has is wayward youth. If we can identify those individuals in the first to second grade and take corrective measures then, rather than waiting later and imprisoning them, we're much better off. Great progress has been made on that. Secondly, and this goes back to what Dave and Bill Wyatt have said, it's absolutely clear that our economy is changing. We are no longer a resource-based economy, but one that's going to depend upon a wide diversity of businesses, including but not restricted to high tech. College education will be absolutely critical for the well-being of the individual as well as the community. Higher education becomes an essential linchpin in developing a well-functioning, economically sound community. And an economically sound community is a necessary condition for a high quality of life.
What I would add to that is we're trying to practice what we teach. If we're trying to create a sense of community, then we will help reform education as a community. We will involve people who have previously not been at the table. We will listen carefully to each other. We will demonstrate in how we work on issues together, whether they are economic development issues or human resource issues or issues of the communities in which we live and the resources that they need to be good communities for us all. The qualities and values that Myles just mentioned and that we all want to be able to pass along to other people that come behind us.
I don't know that I would add very much. I think several things have been said. Judith said it in one way. We need to, as the jargon in the private sector would be, we need to walk the talk. We need to demonstrate by the way we behave what we're trying to teach students. Second thing, I think, goes back to Myles' concluding comments at the beginning on values. People of this state individually have great values, I think. I think individually they probably have great vision. But I think that we seem to be lacking that long-term vision right now as to where Oregon ought to be going. It's been some time since we have heard the way we did in the past that Oregon is the key to the Pacific Rim. It's been some time since we really have seen the entire community, the private sector, higher education, and government working together to really move this state forward. And that should be part of our values and our attitudes, and that should stem from what we can see where this state could be going. I think that's a major challenge for all of us.
Good afternoon. My name is Randy Leonard. I am a City Club member. I'm also the newest member of the Oregon State Senate from Multnomah County, having just been appointed to the Committee on Education in the State Senate. This is very useful for me listening to this discussion. I am a supporter of House Bill 3565, the CATS plan. However, there has been one criticism leveled at it that I would appreciate hearing your response to, and that is that a child, all other things being equal, will probably do quite well in the primary and secondary education process using the new CATS plan. However, for those children where all other things are not equal, kids from families who are not healthy, the environment isn't healthy, kids of color, even our children that are female may not have, by the time they're supposed to make a choice, which track to go down on for education, know or have the tools to know which way they want to go. I am concerned that by the time they reach the point in their life that they may want to go to a university, that because of the track they went down, somehow the system is not flexible enough to allow them to go to the university. Can you address my concern and tell me if there has been some consideration given to that problem?
Yes, there has. I think each of us will want to comment on that. In the Portland metropolitan area, a number of people came together to create a proposal for the federal government Title 11 of the Higher Education Act, focusing particularly on endangered children and youth. We're looking at ways to reduce the violence that those youth experience, but also ways to allow them to come to school ready to learn and interested in learning and able to be successful in the learning environment so that they do have options. So that's one way. We also have partnerships with organizations in the community that work with youth, such as Self-Enhancement, Inc., and other programs that reach out and very effectively to support kids, their families, and the communities they live in. The other comment I'd make, though, is that the fear that a lot of people had about 3565 about tracking may be also in your question, and by developing the programs, the professional technical programs, so that they incorporate the liberal arts as well as applications, in other words, the applied academics that the teams that are putting these together are looking at, we believe people will be able to move back and forth, even if they end up in a totally different kind of educational program than they originally started. They should be able to move effectively. That's our goal collectively. And our college faculty, our community college faculty, and public schools are all working together to be sure that it's possible for a student to keep choices open all through the K through 12 experience and on into college.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add, I think Myles mentioned this as one of the challenges. This is the balance question. And if we insist that the primary thing that people take out of education is the ability to continue to learn, then we're going to see, and as we look at so-called lifelong learning, we're going to see people picking up the option to go into the more academic area at some later point in their life if they decide that that workforce activity does not satisfy their needs. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing we still talk about older than average students, and we rarely talk about younger than average students. But somebody obviously is younger just as much as somebody is older than the average. Pretty soon we'll forget about that and we'll simply be talking about education per se, at any time, any place, for anyone.
I would only add that that challenge or problem was more prominent when 3565 was first developed. Since that time, and since both the Department of Education and the system of higher education have been working on it, I believe there's been a better understanding of the issues, and it looks like we're moving away from tracking more towards the ability to cross over and have a common core of knowledge. I myself was concerned about it at the beginning. I no longer have those concerns.
Andrew Wheeler, Dr. Brand, I think. I've been concerned that universities will be kind of as farm teams for businesses. Sometimes, like high-tech, would be riding high, and then something else would happen, and then there would be this idea of what can schools do for the economy. And in a kind of a content way, I'm wondering if liberal education is sort of an endangered species in the upcoming knowledge economy.
Right. No. I think the short answer is no. We believe that students will change professions, not jobs, 3 to 5 times through their lives. And most of those professions do not now exist. How can we, at a university, begin to educate people for a future that we don't know about now? Well, I think we need to do 2 very important things. We need to give them the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and a little biology. But in addition, and this is to re-emphasize a point my colleagues have made over and over again, it's the ability to learn and appreciation of the lack of knowledge that we have that's the most important. We must find ways to access knowledge in the future and not expect students to walk away from our institutions knowing everything they need to know for life. And so whether we prepare them for one business opportunity or another, or just to be well-educated people, though few will have that luxury in the future, we must provide them with the tools to learn and an understanding of what it means not to know something.
Let me pick up. It's interesting you addressed that to Myles Brand and not to the other two of us, because in fact all of our undergraduate programs have a core of at least half of the courses in the liberal arts. No matter what choice a student makes at the undergraduate level, they will take a significant amount of the liberal arts. And our provost told me this morning that after surveying a number of chief executives as well as hiring officers in business, that the characteristics of our new general education proposal at Portland State exactly fits what those folks say they're looking for in their employees, and it is the liberal arts. So no, it's not in danger at all. In fact, it's in the ascendancy.
I think we have time for one more question and one brief answer.
Keith Kohlberg, City Club member. This question may not be appropriate, so you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I was curious what your people's positions were on the sales tax measure. Do you see it as an appropriate solution to education funding in this state, or do you see better alternatives?
Yeah, let me address it very quickly. As you know, we're state employees, so we're not allowed to take a public position on it. We can look, however, at the impact of resources or lack thereof for higher education and for all education for that matter. And I think that what we're seeing is and I'll call it a revolution. We're seeing a revolution in the way we do things, which to some extent has been driven by a resource shortage. But let me suggest that resources are always short. That as long as there is creativity and there's a faculty where at any level that's creative, there will never be enough resources to handle that creativity. And what we're faced with now is, in a sense, a different kind of paradigm shift. President Ramaley got my attention a few weeks ago when she said, if you treat ballot measure 5 as a symptom, not as a cause, you may take a different attitude toward what our real problems are. But we do have resource problems. We will continue to have resource problems. Obviously, if new resources are added, those problems are minimized or at least reduced. If new resources are not added and, in fact, are additionally withdrawn, our problems in meeting some of these particular challenges is enhanced.
The only other thing I would add is, at some point, lack of resources overpowers creativity. And I believe that in this state, we are at that point.
We'll conclude.
My concluding remark is, let's pay attention to community values and how that might relate to a adequately funded education system.
Good.
Certainly, as we reflect from some of the leaders in education that have come to the City Club program, whether it's Jack Beerworth or Yvonne Katz, the continuation of that tradition with the presidents today, John Byrne, Judith Ramaley, Myles Brand, I have great hope for the future of this state, and thank you for coming to speak today. We are adjourned.